As the plate went out, Jack felt a strange sense of peace. He wasn't pretending to be a cowboy or a waiter. He was just a man who knew how to cook. Chapter 22. The Critics' Crucial Crust. The following Sunday, the review appeared in the Santa Monica Gazette. Maurice was the first to see it, bursting into the kitchen with the newspaper clutched in his trembling hands. "Listen to this!" Maurice shouted. The sea bass was a revelation, a delicate balance of acidity and butter that spoke of a chef who understands the soul of the ingredients. The bistro on the pier has found a new voice, and it is a voice worth listening to. The kitchen erupted in cheers. Maurice hugged Jack, a brief, prickly encounter that smelled of garlic and expensive cologne, and announced that Jack would be heading the weekend specials from now on. "You did it, Jack," Janet cried when he told her that night. She had bought a bottle of the good wine, not the stuff they usually had at the Beagle, but a vintage red that actually had a cork. "We did it," Jack corrected, clinking his glass against hers. "I wouldn't have even gone to that interview if you hadn't pushed me. And I wouldn't have pushed you if I hadn't seen how much you loved it," Janet said softly. They sat on the balcony, the sound of the ocean, a rhythmic backdrop to their shared success. The 1970s were coming to a close, and the world was changing. Disco was fading. The economy was shaky, but inside apartment 201, something solid had been built. Chapter 23. A Night at the Disco. While Jack and Janet were celebrating professional milestones, Cindy Snow was preparing for a milestone of her own. The disco contest at the community center was tonight, and she and Mr. Furley were the dark horses of the competition. "Mr. Furley, you're stepping on my toe again." Cindy giggled, adjusting her spandex leggings. "It's not stepping, Cindy, it's syncopated impact," Ralph said, sweating profusely in a lime green polyester suit that seemed to vibrate under the fluorescent lights. The community center was packed. Larry Dallas was there, acting as the self-appointed MC, and a crowd of neighbors had gathered to see the spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Larry's voice boomed through the speakers, "give it up for our next contestants, the Dynamite Duo." The music started the driving beat of Stayin' Alive, and Cindy and Ralph took the floor. It was a sight to behold. Cindy moved with the natural athleticism of a former cheerleader, while Ralph moved like a man who had seen Grease 20 times and had decided to incorporate all the moves at once. He spun, he dipped, nearly dropping Cindy in the process, and he ended with a dramatic split that resulted in a very audible tearing sound from his trousers. The crowd went wild. They didn't win the first prize, went to a couple of teenagers from Venice Beach, but they won the Spirit of Disco Award, which consisted of a plastic trophy and a $10 gift certificate to a local wig shop. "We were robbed, Cindy," Ralph said later, pinning a safety pin into his pants. "But we were the heart of the show." "You were great, Mr. Furley," Cindy said, her face flushed with excitement. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a third wheel. She felt like a star. Chapter 24. The morning after the moonlight. The sun rose over Santa Monica the next morning, warm and gold. Jack was the first one up, quietly making a batch of blueberry muffins. The scent of baking bread and fruit filled the air, a domestic perfume that seemed to anchor the apartment. Janet emerged from her room, looking sleepy and beautiful. She walked over to the counter and leaned against him. "Is it muffin day?" "It's whatever you want day," Jack said, kissing her forehead. "I want it to stay like this," she whispered. "No more lies, no more Three's Company secrets, just us." Jack looked around the apartment at the wicker furniture, the pastel walls, and the jar of wildflowers on the table. He thought of the cowboy hat in the back of the closet and the Spanish textbook in the trash. He thought of Ralph's lime green suit and Cindy's plastic trophy. It wasn't a perfect life, and they weren't perfect people. They were messy, clumsy, and prone to making the most ridiculous mistakes. But they were together, and they were honest. And in the golden light of a 1970s California morning, that was more than enough. Chapter 25. The Neon Midnight of 1980. The clock on the wall of the Regal Beagle ticked toward 12, but the energy inside was different than in years past. The shimmering disco balls still spun, but the music was shifting. New wave synths were beginning to compete with the heavy funk of the 70s. It was New Year's Eve, 1979, and the air was thick with the scent of cheap champagne and a new decade. Jack, Janet, and Cindy stood at their usual table, surrounded by streamers. Larry was already deep in conversation with a girl wearing neon leg warmers, and Mr. Furley was sporting a tuxedo that looked like it had survived a glitter factory explosion. 10, 9, 8, the crowd roared. Jack grabbed Janet's hand, pulling her close. He could feel her heart beating against his chest. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. As the balloons fell, Jack didn't look at the clock. He kissed her, not just to ring in the year, but to anchor himself in the reality they had built. Happy 1980. Janet, he whispered as they pulled apart. Happy 1980. Cowboy, she teased, using the old nickname. The 80s had arrived. And with them came a new set of rules. The Three's Company era was transitioning into something more permanent. Cindy was talking about moving to a new apartment in Beverly Hills to be closer to her secretarial agency, and the dynamic of apartment 201 was shifting from a survival pact to a romantic sanctuary. Chapter 26. The proposal in the souffle. Jack had been planning it for months. He had saved every extra dollar from his sous chef bonuses, and he had finally found the ring, a modest, elegant sapphire that reminded him of the Santa Monica Sea. He decided to do it on Valentine's Day. He would cook a 5-course meal at the apartment, ending with a chocolate souffle. He would hide the ring inside the souffle. It was a classic, foolproof plan, except it was Jack Tripper. The dinner went beautifully. The candlelight was perfect, the music was soft, and Janet looked radiant. But as Jack brought out the souffle, he tripped over the corner of the rug, the same rug that had been the bane of his existence for years. The souffle flew through the air, landing directly in Janet's lap. "Jack!" she screamed, jumping up as the hot chocolate pooled on her silk dress. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jack scrambled to help her, but in the chaos, the ring dislodged from the dessert began to roll across the floor toward the heating vent. "The ring! Janet, get the ring!" Jack lunged for the small, shining object. Janet froze, looking at the ring, then at Jack, who was now flat on his face near the vent, clutching a sapphire and covered in chocolate. "A ring?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack sat up, his hair disheveled, a smear of cocoa on his cheek. He held the ring out, his hand shaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wanted it to be unsurpassed. I wanted to be suave. I wanted to be anyone but me." Janet knelt down in the chocolate-stained rug, her eyes filling with tears. "But I don't want anyone but you, Jack. I never did." "Janet would," Jack said, his voice cracking. "Will you marry me? Will you spend the rest of your life watching me trip over rugs and spill things on your dresses?" "Yes," she whispered, throwing her arms around him. 1,000 times, yes. They sat on the floor, surrounded by ruined chocolate and spilled wine, and for the first time in their lives, the fumble didn't matter. They were engaged. Chapter 27. The Florist's Ambition. With a wedding to plan, Janet felt a new surge of ambition. Working at the mall florist was stable, but she wanted more. She wanted a shop of her own, a place called Wood and Petals, where she could curate the arrangements and bring the beauty of the California coast into the city. "It's a huge risk, Jack," she said one evening, looking over a business proposal on the kitchen table. "Interest rates are high, and we have a wedding to pay for." "I've got the bistro job, Janet," Jack reminded her, leaning over her shoulder. "And Maurice is talking about letting me buy into the partnership. We can do this. We've survived Bart Furley and David Vance. We can survive a small business loan." Janet looked at him, seeing the man he had become. He wasn't the clumsy student anymore. He was a partner, a pillar. They found a small storefront on Main Street, a former apothecary with high ceilings and large windows that caught the morning light. They spent their weekends stripping wallpaper and painting the walls a soft, sage green. Cindy helped with the bookkeeping, and Larry managed to find a delivery van that only broke down once every 3 days. The opening of Wood and Petals was a quiet success. There were no neon signs or disco balls, just the scent of fresh roses and the sight of Janet Wood behind the counter, finally owning her own piece of the world. Chapter 28. A Texan in Santa Monica. The wedding was set for June. Invitations were sent to Des Moines and the Tripper family in San Diego. But 2 weeks before the big day, there was a knock at the door. Jack opened it to find a man standing there. He wore a real Stetson hat, real boots, and a denim jacket that looked like it had seen 100 dust storms. He had a mole on his cheek, a real one. "Can I help you?" Jack asked. "I'm looking for Jack Tripper," the man said in a slow, deep drawl. "My brother told me this was the place." Jack, frozen. "Your brother?" "Yeah, Austin Tripper." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. "Austin? You mean you're the real Austin?" "Name's Tex," the man said, grinning. "Austin's my middle name. I'm Jack's cousin from Abilene. Heard there was a wedding, and I figured I'd come see if my little cousin finally learned how to handle a lady."